Here we see the common immunization schedule. This is the United States immunization schedule, and it's set up by the CDC, the Cootie Detection Corporation in the United States, and most developed countries have their own panel who decides what vaccines are necessary and when they should be administered. And I'm on a couple of science groups on Facebook, and it's very interesting to have a discussion about vaccinations and see where various countries vaccinate. Australia has a slightly different vaccination system, so does the UK. There's a lot of controversy right now, for instance, because the National Health Service in the UK does not think it's important to vaccinate for varicella, and so they don't include that as part of their schedule. Parents have to vaccinate on their own dime, and there have been a couple of children who have been seriously affected by vaccination and their parent, or by getting chickenpox, and have gotten very, very sick, and their parents are really pushing for the National Health Service to adopt the varicella vaccine. But that's just one example of something that's different from the United States. But these are recommended at various ages, and depending on if you could be exposed to these particular illnesses. So the first vaccine that a newborn gets is hepatitis B, and I think I mentioned in our previous set of slides talking about viruses why hepatitis B is considered so important for newborns, even though a lot of parents balk at it because they think of hepatitis B as something that prostitutes and drug addicts get, but that is not the case. It is a blood-borne pathogen, and anybody can get it in a lot of different situations. Healthcare workers, children at daycare, and traditionally hepatitis B has been responsible for many, many cases of cirrhosis as a person gets on in life, and liver cancer. And by vaccinating against hepatitis B, you are virtually totally protected from hepatitis-related liver cancer. Diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. This particular vaccine is given at 2, 4, and 6 months of age. We are extremely fortunate that we don't have to worry about diphtheria anymore in this country. It used to kill children by the thousands. And it was a horrible death. The child literally strangled there in front of his parents, and very, very pitiful. It would wipe out whole families. Now you hardly see a case. Thanks to anti-vaxxers, there's still an occasional case of diphtheria here and there. A young boy died of it in Spain a year or so ago because he had not been vaccinated, but it's extremely rare. You just don't see it. Tetanus, another universally fatal illness if you contract it, and we have protection against that goes through the lifespan. And then pertussis. It's a little tougher illness to eradicate because maternal antibodies don't cross the placenta. They're too big, and so now they're recommending that women have a booster in pregnancy so that they don't catch it and pass it on to their child. And then that's why we start vaccinating at 2, 4, and 6 months of age, because pertussis is such a horrendous illness, and it used to kill a lot of babies too. Haemophilus influenza type B, this is an illness we don't even really think about. Hib, pneumonia, and meningitis used to affect 20,000 children per year, and 1,000 would die. Back in the mid-'80s, they ended up with a vaccine for it, and you just don't see it anymore. This particular vaccine has come to mean a lot to me. My nephew married a woman who got Hib meningitis when she was 18 months old. And she almost died. Her parents were told that they might lose her. She survived with just, she's deaf in one ear, but didn't have any other permanent damage, thank God. But she was born in 1985, which was just a year or so before this vaccine was available. So even while she was suffering the meningitis, it was just, a short time later. I think 1988, they started widely vaccinating for this, 87 or 88. And so she missed it by just a couple of years, and thank God survived. But it really, really has increased the health of infants and small children. Polio used to be an illness that our parents and grandparents were terrified of, but thanks to vaccination, it's pretty much eradicated in this country. There are only 2 countries, I think, where it's still found in wild form. Pakistan and Nigeria, I believe, were the 2 countries that they have not been able to totally eradicate it. And a lot of that is because that's because of anti-vaccine sentiment. Measles, mumps, and rubella, all illnesses that have done a lot of damage through the years. I have a cousin who's completely deaf because her mother had rubella during the first 3 months of her pregnancy, and that was in 1960. So my cousin is still alive and well and deaf simply because of this otherwise fairly mild childhood illness, and thankfully we've got it eradicated. You hardly see a naturally occurring case of rubella. Varicella or chickenpox, this vaccine became available in the early 90s. I know it wasn't available for my son, who was born in 89, and he got chickenpox at age 2, but it was available for my daughter, who was born in 1994. I didn't get it until later because I was a little bit vaccine hesitant back then. I have now changed completely and am no longer vaccine hesitant. So eventually she got it, the vaccine, not the disease. Pneumococcal vaccinations, various forms of the pneumococcus can give you severe pneumonia or meningitis, and we have a variety of vaccines for those depending on what age. Influenza, that's something we fiddle with every year, various strains of influenza coming up, and we kind of have a little bit of a heads up because we can look at how the southern hemisphere of the world, what their flu season is like, and that gives us an idea of what ours is going to be. But influenza mutates very rapidly, and so it changes quite a bit. Hepatitis A is a vaccine only given for selected populations, usually people in military service, people who work with foods quite a bit. Hepatitis A is a fecal-oral transmitted pathogen. It's not bloodborne the way hepatitis B and C are, and so they usually will give it to selected populations that are more likely to run into it. Just a few other little notes. The DTaP, diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis is given to infants and children, and then once you hit age 11, then they switch to the Tdap, which is more tetanus, also contains diphtheria, and the A in pertussis stands for acellular. They used to give whole cell pertussis, but it had slightly more risk of side effects, fever, and was linked to seizures. And because of people's terror about this, the vaccine went from a whole cell, which was a lot stronger and gave you better immunity, to an acellular, just part of the virus. And so now boosters are required. And it's recommended that adults get a Tdap every 10 years. And then a Tdap and influenza is also recommended for pregnant women for the reasons I mentioned earlier, and also influenza can be devastating to a mother and her fetus. They can cause death, they can cause pregnancy loss, and so it's recommended that if a woman's pregnant during flu season, she go ahead and have that vaccine.